You're listening to episode number 46 of the UpRev Ninja podcast, and I'm your host, Tom Hudson.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the UpRev Ninja podcast. If this is your first time listening, thanks for joining us. This show is produced each week with the single intent of discovering the tips, tricks, hacks, and lessons learned from our guests that has catapulted them into living the best version of themselves. Join your host, Tom Hudson, as he continues his search for the best methods to uprev his life. Now, let's dive into the show.
So today's guest is Diana Thomas. She's the CEO and founder of the World Egg Bank. We really dive into a couple of things here. Really just her own search for a donor egg was deeply unsatisfying, and that's the reason she created the World Egg Bank. So welcome, Diana Thomas. Hey, welcome to the UpRev Ninja podcast. Today, I've got Diana Thomas with me. How are you doing today, Diana?
I'm fantastic. Thank you.
That's great. When I came across your profile and I read your bio, I was like, this is a challenging subject. I think a lot of people have that can, first off, probably connect with either if not themselves, their family or loved ones. And, I think the way that you've pivoted and turned this into, your passion and what you're doing now, I think is great. And I really do. So that being said, why don't you tell us a little about who you are and how you got to where you're at today?
Gosh, okay. Well, I can tell you that it probably has a lot of interest to people because I do work in the field of infertility, and 1 in 7 couples have trouble getting pregnant. So it's one of those topics that people feel very kind of ashamed about. I can't have a baby, and you're born and you're a woman and you imagine having a child your whole life, and then when you can't, you feel like there's something wrong with you. And I just wish I could dispel that feeling from people immediately. It's one of my biggest focuses, goals when we talk to people is this happens all the time. It's just how you're going to deal with it. And I know I started in this when I was 25 years old and had my master's degree. I had a full-time job as an architectural historian. I was married to a political science academic. I was ready for children and I couldn't get pregnant. And little did I know that was a very pivotal point in my life. And of course it was all horrible and I couldn't see the silver lining in all of it at the time. It was just dealing day to day with the emotional roller coaster of not being able to get pregnant when, you have the house, the marriage, the white picket fence, and you're ready to go with the kids. And It just doesn't happen. Yeah. And it's how most people are. They assume that when they're ready, it's just going to happen. But I ended up spending the next 15 years in various in vitro treatment programs in Canada and the U.S. And a lot changed in my life during that time. I renovated houses. I lost my father. I lost my brother to cancer. A lot of things in my career. And the entire time, my preoccupation with getting through the next step, the next treatment plan, was always on my mind and part of my world. But I still wasn't pregnant. And after 15 years, I really was left with a rather big empty nest. And I came across a doctor who told me that my only viable option left, because I had gone through just about everything that they could. And during those 15 years, it was really parallel to the growth of in vitro fertilization. So I was always the first one to try this and the first one to try that. And I felt like a bit of a pincushion and an experiment the whole time. But I just kept saying, okay, well, let's just keep moving ahead. And not to say I didn't have my black moments, my downtimes, but I just have always had this ability to pick myself up and see beyond it. And I'm grateful for that strength. And I've learned to really clue into that strength through life and figure out what that was about. We'll probably talk a little bit more about that later. But so, the first thought was I have to use a donor egg. And nobody knew what that was in the early 90s. It wasn't common practice like it is today. So my first thought was, oh, gee, I feel like a freak. This is going to be freakish. How am I going to tell my family? What does this mean with my genes? It was a lot to process. And then I just woke up one morning and realized that every child was unpredictable, lovable individual. So I had to let go of the thought that I had this preconditioned attachment through genes that really sometimes is there with kids and sometimes isn't, So I just decided that what I really wanted was the opportunity to have a relationship with a child in our family. It was a new technology and I kind of broke all the rules when they said, well, you need one, but we don't know, can't tell you how how to find a donor, and we don't have donor eggs, and well, good luck. So
wow. Okay.
I went, okay. So I did some research and I found my own donor and I advertised and I figured out what I wanted to know from the donor, what my child may need to know from about the donor in the future, how to forge an open relationship with her, how to disclose all the medical process and the risks and the, accurate information. So I wanted her to be able to be really on board with this in an open way so that nobody was feeling used or deceived or cajoled. So I ended up finding a woman and, people say, what are you looking for? And I said, well, just somebody with a similar spirit. I didn't really have anything in mind. My sister and I don't look anything alike. Our personalities are entirely different. So I was pretty open about it, and I found somebody with very similar spirit. She was kind of determined and open and obviously willing to take risks because this was so new. So
right.
I ended up having one of the first 100 babies in the United States with use of an egg donor. And I was forever grateful to people that helped me and think of these women every day. And I still keep in touch with them because I did end up having twins later with another egg donor. But I realized after I had my child, and I was in a career as an architectural historian doing restoration of historic properties and managing big projects. And I thought, I want to do this. I could do this for other couples. And I know how stymied I felt by the whole process, especially since it was still so underground in a lot of ways. So I formed a company and I just hit the pavement and I solicited the local IVF centers and they began referring couples to me. And that was 22 years ago.
Well, it's amazing. Like you practically, like you said, you were one of the first, 100 in the U.S. So you practically helped write the book on, this process. And then, like you just mentioned, the pivot that you made. You're like, wait, there's other people out there that need this. And you went down that path. What has that been like now, 2 years later? All the people that you've been able to help, the families and everything, got to be very rewarding.
It is. I mean, it's just phenomenal that I've been able to help people because I know what they go through. And I know the desire is so powerful when you want a child. And I really think it's almost biological for most women and not all women. And I fully appreciate people making the choice to not have a child. But I do think for those who really want one, this is a very hopeful path now. The pregnancy rates are very high. I moved on to, in 2004, I started the first egg bank, which is freezing women's eggs and shipping them around the world. And I'm the only one allowed to ship eggs into all of Australia. I ship to Canada, to UK. And, whenever I have a down day, I think, my gosh, there's a soul alive out there because I helped it happen. And I just feel great the rest of the day. So
yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, absolutely imagine what that's like. So, I want to go back. Like I said, you kind of helped write the book of this process. And, there was a stigma to it that you mentioned. It doesn't sound like it really held you back. Like you didn't, this is what I heard, but it didn't sound like you were held back by fear. More of, how do I do this? How do I resolve this issue? So you definitely sound pretty driven. I mean, was there any, shame or an embarrassment or anything that you had to personally work through? I know you mentioned your family and friends kind of, you're afraid, the freakish, but did it really hold you back?
It didn't. And I just knew I was going to have a child, and it was just figuring out how I was going to get there. Maybe it's that perpetual hopefulness or, I don't really move on to, I realize when there is a wall that I have to stop. It's not as though I'm kind of insanely driven. I really do just trust my gut. And I know, little moment at times in my life and choosing, I really did have to choose to reinvent myself when I gave up my career of 17 years and moved into this. But I think the pivotal moment for me came when I couldn't really talk to my friends and family much about this anymore. They wanted me to give up trying to conceive a child and accept that I'd be childless. And I realized they wanted me to stop because it was hard for them to watch me go through it. And they couldn't fix it. And I became aware that fears of facing my emotional roller coaster was irrelevant to me. It was my desires and my goals, and this was my life. And I had to decide what I wanted to do and if I could deal with the consequences of my decision, no matter what they be. And I just decided to accept my own life choices and trusted that I would know when and if it was time to stop. And I shared my story with people, but I didn't rely on their feedback to be my direction.
Right. It takes a lot of courage to do that. And, I think it's human nature that we project our, feelings and emotions on other people because, we'll sit sit there like, ooh, if that were me going through that, then I would feel really bad. So I'm going to tell her, not to do this, and that'll make her feel good.
Yeah.
It's just a paradox, I guess, because, you're not really helping the person. You're actually kind of doing the opposite. And, I guess kind of jumping forward 22 years, we'll go back, but how is that all shaken out at the end now with your, family and friends from then?
I think my family obviously are very grateful that I had my children. I had 3 wonderful boys, and I have a brother who's a great uncle who didn't have kids, and my mother, who's 90, just moved into the home with us, and they have a fantastic full circle for, I think my children and what's happened has created a lot of full circles for other people that I didn't anticipate.
That's great. I mean, it really is. And, I don't know, people have a hard time sometimes looking past the immediate, which is, it's good to live in the now, but I think there's certain cases that it's good to kind of think forward. So
yeah, I think, you're kind of touched on a point when you said, did I feel shame or fear?
Yeah.
And I don't know that I feel fear very much, but I do feel it. There's obviously, but I've learned how to certain techniques to deal with it for myself. And I don't know that they would translate to other people, but I know that I have to separate my own empathy for others. And I have a natural inclination and curiosity about other people to listen and to see their point of view. And I had to really learn to separate that from my own fears, my own feelings, and my own decisions on what to do. And it sounds so simple, but really it isn't. And I practice it every day because I want to help people. I have obstacles and challenges and things that come up. And, starting the first egg bank in the world, I did have to establish a model that other egg banks have emulated. And I don't say that braggadociously. I say that because I was just there first and I didn't really think about what other people were doing. I was just thinking about what I was doing.
Right.
And I see that it has had a large impact on, the whole industry has grown up around all the things that I did.
Well, the world 20 years ago is completely different now, there's, imagine all the stigmas, right? Like, online dating or anything online. There was a stigma about like, oh, you're going to buy something online, well, your credit card's going to get, but regardless, it's just a completely different world now. And, these conversations that we were ashamed of 20 years ago are just a culture now. And I don't want to say the word was normal then. It was just people didn't think it was.
Right.
It's a way of life now. So you were a part of that, Diana. I mean, really awesome. So.
Oh, thank you. It wasn't my intention, actually. I wasn't expecting anyone to know my name in 20 years. I was just happy to have my child and do love challenges, and I suppose I learned not to react to other people and other sets of circumstances in order to please or make happy or be safe. I've always danced a little bit to my own drums since childhood, so I was used to that. So in a way, I already had sort of the blueprint was there to just keep moving ahead the best way I thought was best.
Yeah.
And that's all I can do. I can't really account for what other people accept or know or challenge. It's just okay.
So, Diana, you touched on this a moment ago around the fear that you had, and you said you had a model, but potentially it wouldn't work for anyone else. Can we dive into that a little?
Sure.
So, I think, fear and procrastination and shame, all these negative emotions really holds us back from being the best version of ourselves. And every time you push yourself and you get outside of that, little bubble, that comfort zone, you grow and it gets easier, but there's always another challenge on the other side of the fence.
Every day.
Every day. There is. And it's just, it's a continuous improvement. You're always trying to get better. So tell us about this. This was 20 years ago and, where you're at now. How did you kind of go through this fear? It doesn't sound like you had a lot of support from your family, your friends at that time, or your culture in itself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not trying to blame your family, but
right.
Society as a whole wasn't supporting you necessarily. So, how did you get through this? What did you do?
Well, I guess, there are different, details, but there is one thing that I learned to do. I think you have to learn to listen to your own chatter in your head and know that it's chatter. I don't know how to describe it, but we all talk to ourselves all the time. And is it the old story, a new story? Is it, I think people have to learn to distinguish. And one of the ways I did do it is, and I still do it, if I'm really emotionally involved in something, I have to stop and I call it my body check. When I actually close my eyes and I scan my body from head to toe and I say, okay, what is just in me? What is my thought? What are my feelings? What's my voice? Not everything else around me. And that helps me start to distinguish push. I call it my gut. Some people might call it, their true self or the fearless person in us or whatever. But you have to be able to figure out who's talking. For one thing, I don't know if that makes sense, but that is what I do. And once I get the separation and I realize, okay, so this is my fear. What is my fear around? I usually give myself a little time to just let the fear express itself. I'm talking like a half hour. I go, okay, voice, go at it.
Right.
And I just go through all the fears, the unknowns, what people will say, how it would look, how it would affect this person, the fears. Then I say, okay, so those fears are going to happen. Those things are going to happen anyway, no matter what I choose to do. So what is it I want to do? And what is my real fear? If I take all those voices away and all those external, who knows what's going to happen? The unknown is really not much of doesn't hold me back much, because I've learned through experience that just walking into the unknown has been nothing but positive for me. Not pleasant at all times, certainly, but it's always resulted, I call it my silver lining in any challenge. And there's always a silver lining, and it may not show up right away. It may be years or circumstances later, and I go, oh my gosh, if that hadn't happened back then and I didn't move beyond it, I wouldn't be able to do this now. So if you reflect on when you have challenged your fear, moved into the unknown, I guess feel it, do it anyway sort of thing, with that level of security that you can deal with whatever the consequences are. Obviously I'm not talking about the fear of jumping out of a tree or
right.
Those rational fears. I'm talking about the irrational ones that we all carry around. And I think because of my experiences and being aware of that, there's not a lot left in life that I really fear. I can be nervous about getting up in front of 300 people and doing a talk, but as soon as I start talking, it goes away. Yeah. And I know that that's going to happen. So every time I stand up, the fear is smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
And then it's just kind of silly. I kind of laugh at it and I kind of joke with it. It's just, it doesn't hinder me, but it always is good for me to be aware of it.
Right. I think, a couple of things, that voice in your head, the volume gets turned down the more you combat it or you show irrational. Mm-hmm. And, so I definitely think that that's a part of it. And then you said, getting in front of an audience, how you can laugh at that within a second, after you get up there.
Right.
You have this positive outlook. I think that's the big thing. Like our society, I think this is shifting probably in the last 10 years or so with, entrepreneurship and, Simi Valley and all this. I think it's shifted in the last 10 to 15 years and it's becoming more prevalent. But failure historically has been seen as a negative. Like you don't fail because it's not good. And I think that, our culture is slowly shifting and, hey, failure is good, because as good if you fail and you learn from it.
Right.
And you can express what you learned, and that's how we uprev. That's how we always get to that next version, because you're never going to launch a product or a service that's 100% perfect every customer out there.
Yeah.
So, I think that definition of success is changing, which is definitely good because that's a lot of pressure off of everyone, I think.
I agree with you. I'm not so sure that it's changing as in a perceptible way yet. I'm fairly cynical about politics and other things, but
that's a fair statement.
But, I see my kids and they're seniors in high school. I have twins that I had with another egg donor 4 years later after my first child. So they're 17. And I see the fear of failure is so ingrained in schools and children. And I talk to them about this all the time, that failure is a part of growing in life and everybody fails. Whether it's a small personal goal you have, I won't yell at my kids today. And then you yell at your kids. And then, but if you acknowledge it and you go and talk to your kids, I really didn't mean to yell at you or whatever. But I think we have to learn to accept failure, see it as a growth opportunity, and know it's just a part of life. And it happens to everybody every day. And I'm not so sure that people are that willing to accept that. I think there's a lot of distraction and diversion and blame and fear that's going on around people. And I think it's quite a conscious effort to not get engaged in that.
Yeah, So definitely on the political side, I completely agree with you.
Mm-hmm.
I think fear mongering is probably has always been a part of that palette, and the last year to 2 years it ramped up. And it's not just in the U.S. I mean, I don't want to turn this into a political.
No, yeah, I know it is. Yeah.
With recent event in the AFP party, I believe in Germany, the first time that they've won as well as they did since World War II. We saw it in Italy and France and a few other places in the past this calendar year. So yeah, fear is definitely out there and people are leveraging it. So I mean, that's something we need to be mindful of, and as parents, ensure that we're trying to educate our children and our neighbors and everything. So I'll get off my soapbox. That's a whole different show I could do.
Oh, I know, and but I think that you are hitting upon fear of a personal nature.
Yes,
and entrepreneurs are the ones that experience that because hey, the buck stops with them and everything they do.
Right.
So there is a lot of people saying, well, why didn't you know that? Or how could you do that? And, I love attorneys who talk about retroflective way, well, why didn't you have them sign a contract 20 years ago?
Right.
I mean, there's certain things that you just got, well, I just didn't, this is what I do now. But it's a really important distinction for entrepreneurs, I think, because if you can't recognize your fears, and I think you expressed one was procrastination as sort of a symptom,
right.
But there are lots of them. And I think that if you can't recognize accepting mistakes, accepting fears, accepting obstacles, and saying, I'm going to fail at some of these things, it's just I can't fail at the ones that will bury me. So those take a lot more energy to think about. But it is definitely part of growing as an entrepreneur is dealing with your fear.
Diana, to kind of change the conversation a little here. So mother of three, you're, president and CEO of, the World Egg Bank. You did a career pivot, got a lot going on in the last 20 years. And how do you juggle this? Like, how do you manage your day-to-day life? I mean, there's people out there that are struggling in their 9-to-5 job, parent, hockey game, taking their daughter to dance class. What's your secret? How do you hack all this stuff and manage it?
I guess necessity is the mother of invention. And I was also divorced after having my 3 children some few years later. So I really raised them on my own. And I had to become really efficient at being present wherever I was and being in the moment. So when I'm at work, I focus on my work, although my kids text me, blah, blah, blah. But when I have to learn to separate. When I go home, there have been times and nights and, years beginning when I had to work after I put kids to bed, keep things going. And I just enjoyed what I was doing, for one thing, even if I was tired. But I think it's a matter of being focused in the moment. So I leave problems where they are, even if they're not resolved. I have to leave work. I have to do whatever I have to do. And then I kind of let things go. And I find some time to lay down or sit down or meditate, just relaxing. And I can let thoughts flow through and just grab the ones that I really need to think about and give it a few minutes and move on. But I guess the goal is to I focus on work and children, and I have been the one to sort of put myself last. And that is, I think, endemic for most people who have kids and businesses. But it's on my radar. That's one of my new goals, is to learn to play again. And I used to be really good at it, and I have to find time to, that's just been my recent goal setting, is just, okay, what can I do that's not for a purpose or to get something done, just to be. And even if that's going to the gym, which I did for years, and that's how I managed to deal with stress, was just focusing on those weights and an hour of just nothingness except exercise that didn't require a problem resolved. And that was the only break I really needed to keep moving forward. And so I'm getting back to those old techniques in a way to help me learn how to find myself again and all of what's going on.
I think this was implied in there that I just want to call out, for the audience. I think one piece of it is you're passionate about what you are doing for work. I think that gives people so much fuel and motivation situation that they could work 16-hour days and it's less work or effort than working an 8-hour day that you absolutely hate, doing. So that one thing I think that you implied that I just wanted to call out.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And I was just fortunate not to say it was just in front of me and I took the leap. I think it's about being open to possibilities. And I was just, having a child was such a powerful motivator to me. And knowing that I could do something, I started the business from my home. And I raised this first child that took me 15 years to have. And knowing that I wasn't sure where it was going to go, but I was open to the possibility that this could be my new path, and still open to possibility. I mean, I might have a third career in me yet. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
But it's about, being open to the possibility of people that you meet, and it creates networking opportunities. And I mean, there are all sorts of tangible benefits to an entrepreneur just being open to possibility.
Right.
But there are also very large personal benefits. And I think it was because I had a life where I have always said, okay, picking up and leaving home and moving to Canada at 17, I look back and I think, wow, how could I do that?
Yeah.
But I was open to the experience and I was open to where it would take me. And, you can't always be that freewheeling in life, but certainly at 17 I could,
Yeah.
But I think in small ways and in larger ways, I think it's just always where is my passion? What makes me happy? What do I want to do? I think people don't even ask themselves those questions because they're getting up at 6 o'clock and going to work, and it's exhausting to just be in a rut. And it's hard to think, well, I could do that. I could try that. And yes, there'll be this 5-year period where it's going to be really hard, but I'm willing to accept that to get where I want to go.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think more people need to ask that question, A lot of fear that we have in the world start to go away if people started asking the questions about, what can I do to make myself happy? Because you can't find happiness. It's something that's within you. So, so I guess, some of the wrap-up questions here. You've gone through a lot, 20 years, and, let's say there's a person out in the audience today kind of listening, and they're at this crossroads in their life, and they're trying to figure out what path they should take, or, maybe fear is holding them back, or shame, because society is telling us not okay to do that, so like you faced 20 years ago. What would you give that person for advice today?
I suppose I still follow it, and it is take your idea and don't shove it away. You probably have these, I'd love to just be a professional, mountain biker or whatever it is. Take it, don't just shove it away. I could never do that. Start thinking about it, let it percolate. And then I go to step 2, which is get information. I do a lot of research and I do a lot of evaluating about, whether it could work, how long it would take. Am I too old in life to try that path? What are my obstacles? And so I get information and then I start saying, what are the obstacles? And then I start saying, well, okay, an obstacle is just a challenge. It means I haven't thought about how to deal with it, how to manage it, how to overcome it. So then I start creating possibilities around the obstacles. What do I do to overcome them? And then it's really about putting it into action. It's accepting that you're going to give it a try. And if it works, great. And if it doesn't, okay, I can go back and do this again.
Yeah. So an exercise that I do, I used to be very religious about this. Not so much anymore, but I still do it. And, we all have this bucket list. Like I want to learn how to speak a different language. I want to learn how to play the drums, stuff like that. Once a month, I will say, what is going to be that thing for this month? So let's say, October is coming up. I've always wanted to do archery. I'll go do it. I'll take an archery lesson somewhere. And it's not that I'm like diving into it and trying out to be an Olympian archer. It's, I just want to get my feet wet, like, hey, let's try this. I've never done it and see if it strikes chord with you. And if it does, then you can pursue it a little bit more, put a little bit more, invest more time and energy into it. And, if you go out and like, that wasn't near as much fun as I thought, it was. You had these fantasies of Robin Hood or whatever. And you're like, yeah, okay, I'm done with that. And it cost you an hour and, a couple of dollars. But at the end of the year, done that each month, that's 12 new items off of your bucket list. But it's also 12 new stories. You pushed yourself out of your comfort zone and you learned more about you and the world around you.
I think that's fantastic. And I think that you've really much better described my information gathering. It's the same kind of thing. That's exactly what I do. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
And I see my kids do it and it just makes me laugh. I'm going to play guitar and, okay, so we get a guitar, use guitar. And, he thinks he's going to pick it up and be Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And kind of chuckle and I go, well, you got to start here and, put an hour into it a day. It's the same thing. It's breaking it down until you feel like I really don't want to put the effort into being Jimi Hendrix. I think I'll just move on to something else.
And that's okay too. Yeah, I think if you and I were to share our personality trait and test, we'd probably be pretty identical based on that you've been sharing and like pretty much the process I use. Well, Diana, what's the best way to connect with you?
Probably just going to our website.
Okay.
It's theworldeggbank.com. Egg is an EGG. I have a lot of trouble spelling that out with people, but it's the World Egg Bank. And if they want to reach me personally, it's just Diana at the World Egg Bank, and I'll get an email. But, I talk to people all the time who are going through this, and going to Australia next week, and we'll be at a conference there, and New Zealand and London. And I love to travel. I love to talk to people. I know that my experiences are just mine, and if people are interested in hearing my story, but my story, it's mine. And I'm quite grateful that I could write my own story by kind of reinventing different facets of myself at different times. And I think it's kind of a way to really not just survive life, but enjoy it. If you can't find flexibility, and some days it just doesn't work, and other days it's just like, wow, that's going to take me through my next big experiment.
Right. Yeah.
So I'd love it if people were to reach out to us. Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything that, you guys mentioned that you're going to be in Australia, New Zealand, and London. Is there anything that you'd like to share with us right now? Anything that you're promoting, a project, or, obviously your business, anything like that?
I just promote every day, encouraging people to do what their true self, their inner gut, what they really want to do. Give it a try. Because I deal with people that are quite afraid of failure. This is a huge risk, and to try to put out a lot of money to try to have a child, and just the emotional risk. And I just encourage people to just keep moving ahead until they know that they're ready to move on to something else. I'm not really promoting anything in particular. I know that our philosophy and my philosophy is brought into every action we do in my office, everybody I hire, every way that we deal with people, integrated into our business model, so that we can really stand behind what we do and know we're doing it with integrity and trying to give people the best opportunity to get pregnant. And I don't cut corners, and I don't, I just don't do any of those things. And it costs me more. But for me, I have to go home and look at myself in the mirror and be happy about what I'm doing. So it may not be the highest profit margin, but that's okay. This is my life.
Right. You have to be happy at the end of the day. And is there anything, Diana, that we haven't touched on that you would like to bring up, or have we covered everything?
No, I'm grateful that you reached out and we connected, because, it kind of makes me sit back and think about these things again. And although I do a lot of this stuff unconsciously every day, it kind of motivates me to talk to you and about your story, and know that, hey, that's a good idea. Maybe I should be setting a goal every month that's just fun. Maybe that's how I get back into learning to play again,
Absolutely. And honestly, that's one thing I do. It's beneficial, and I'll write about this later. It's on my to-do list. But so one of the things that my wife and I do over Christmas break, we're both away from work during that time. We kind of lay out our plan for the year. Obviously, the first 3 months of the year is pretty much have it dialed in, and trying to 12 months out in the year, it's kind of hard. But I say, okay, what are the 12 things I want to do this year? Okay, I want to try rock climbing. I want to try drums. I want to, try to learn German, just little things like that. And I don't know, my bucket list gets bigger. I can't.
That's right.
So trying to find 12 items is pretty easy. And like that, no more than like half hour to an hour of investment. And if you like it, then try it, put more time and energy into it and find out, I don't want to be Jimi Hendrix.
Right.
So,
well, Tom, thank you. I really appreciate talking to you. It's been fun.
Yeah, you too. And thank you for coming on, and looking forward to where your journey takes you.
Oh, same with you. I'd love to know more about you. It's another conversation, huh?
That was a pretty exciting episode with Diana. A couple of key things for me on this was, she was talking about just walking into the unknown, and that failure is a part of growing. Think back, and we talk about this on the show, but think back when she first started this, looking for an egg donor. People are still kind of freaked out today about online dating, or, wasn't that long ago, people didn't want to put their credit cards when they ordered stuff on the internet. So it's just crazy the stigma that she had to go through 20 years ago. So, fear is definitely a big driver for her to break out of that fear, to become who she is now. The other item that we touched on was just continual growth, and that's a common theme on the show. Always trying to stretch and learn who you are and what it is you want out of this life.
Thanks for listening to the UpRev Ninja podcast with your host, Tom Hudson. Navigate to our website at uprev.ninja today, where you will find additional resources to help you discover the best version of you. While you're there, join our newsletter and join the discussion on your favorite social media platforms. We've got some awesome guests lined up to share with us how they are becoming the best versions of themselves. Again, thank you for listening. Now it's time to go out and UpRev your life.
If you haven't, please head on over to iTunes and leave a 5-star review for the show. By doing so, this helps the show get noticed by more listeners and helps spread the word of how to discover the best version of yourself. Also, if you have any feedback about the show or a guest that you would like, please go to my website, https://uprev.ninja and contact me. This week's review comes from Rocking Real Estate Rebel. Very unique podcast with great content, not just self-help, but also great content for entrepreneurs and others. Tom's interview style is excellent, and he really draws out the core of each of his guests. You will get great info. A must listen.